Hello and welcome to my guide on the Blackrock cards from a control arena standpoint. If you don't know who I am, I coach Infinite Arena using a control base. This is part 1 of a 3-part series. If you don't know what I mean by control arena, I'm going to post a link to a Reddit post that I made a couple months ago about what control arena means in this meta and how you can implement it for more success. Let's get started with the card review. So the first card I want to talk about is Blackwing Corruptor, and how I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about what these cards are comparable with, what cards exist in the game already that you can kind of use to see how good or bad they are in Arena. And then I'm also going to talk about what synergies do they have with the class cards that are coming out and the class cards in existence. So from that point, we can talk about Blackwing Corruptor. I put 3 different cards. Since cards have battle cries, they have effects, there's times where the cards are going to be top tier, there are times where the card's not going to be that top tier. So I try to put the full spectrum so that you can understand, at its very worst, it's going to be similar to this card, or at its very best, it's going to be similar to this card. So at the low end, Blackwing Corruptor is a Lost Toll Strider, or a more expensive Lost Toll Strider. It's just a 5/4, and if you don't have a dragon, there's no battle cry, so it's just not going to do anything. And I consider Toll Strider a fairly weak card since it dies to a lot of removal, a lot of common removal. 4 damage is very easy to take out in the meta right now. So I like looking at cards from the lowest spectrum and seeing if their value at that low spectrum, and then maybe based on the deck we draft, we can rate it higher if we have a dragon or a number of dragons in the deck. We can rate it a little bit higher. But here, at its very worst, it's not going to be a strong card. In mid, sometimes you're going to have a dragon in your hand, and the key issue with the Corruptor is that dragons, there are a lot of dragons that you want to play on the next turn or the turn afterwards, right? If you have cards, you don't want to, it's not a card you can hold in your hand like Fire Elemental. You can hold Fire Elemental until you need it, but with Corruptor, if you have like a 6-cost dragon, you have to play the Corruptor. So in that sense, it's kind of like a Blast Mage, because you're not going to be able to fully control when you need the 3 damage. Maybe you have to play this on turn 5 and they don't have a minion on the board, so it just ends up going face. And it's just something to consider when you have cards like holding a dragon, because in Arena you're forced to play the best cards you have to keep the tempo, and you can't be greedy and hold cards if you have nothing else to play. So it's just something to consider when you draft this card. And on the high end, it's like a slightly cheaper Fire Elemental. Dealing 3 damage is going to be ridiculous, and if you can kill a 3/3 or a 4/3 or something, it's just a huge tempo swing. So you can see the big difference, the wide spectrum that it can range. But when you're drafting from a control standpoint, you have to start with the low end. You can't be drafting bad cards hoping for the synergy to come up. You have to draft good cards, and hopefully the synergy makes those cards amazing, not bad cards and making the cards decent. So it's not really a card I would value too much in Arena, but maybe it will see some use. And then we move on to synergies, right? Paladins and priests are the only class that got dragon cards, so they're the class that this card maybe see more of, because there's a higher chance you can draft some more dragons in that deck. So if you do see this card and you're having a playing paladin or priest, there you can pick it up a little bit more highly in your mental tier list, because they do have dragons in their class cards, making dragons overall more likely to pop up in an arena draft. For the next card, we have Blackwing Tactician. If it's similar to the Corruptor, but instead of dealing damage, it just gets buffed up. So at the low end, it's just a 2/4. It's like Illuminator, which I don't value too much because the stats just don't deal well with anything for 3 mana. It's kind of it dies to almost everything except for a 3/2, right? 3/2s is the only thing it kills, but even when it kills that, it's left with 1 health and dies for free. So it's not the strongest card. In the mid end, it's more like an Unbound Elemental. If you have some dragons in your deck, you can sometimes have it trigger, you can sometimes have it not trigger. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think Unbound Elemental is a pretty decent card. So if you do have dragons in your deck, Tactician is something to consider adding if the choices encourage such a pick. And then if you just have a ton of dragons and it triggers a lot, it's going to be like a Felguard, a 3 for 3/5 without any real drawback. So if the deck is drafted in a way that you have enough dragons to consider picking this card very highly, it can work out really, really well for you. So this is just, a lot of these cards are going to be based on what deck you draft and what type of synergy you can get. So it's very hard to give a this is best, this is best, this is best, because arena is very random, very versatile. You never know what every draft will give you, and based on those drafts, different cards can be better or worse. But I like looking at the low end, looking at the high end, and if the low end is like really is a pretty good low end for the cost, then the card just only gets better, and that's what I really value in cards. So when we look at synergy, it's the same as before. Since it's based on holding a dragon, Paladin and Priest have dragon synergies innate with their class cards, so it's something you might want to pick a little bit higher in a Paladin or a Priest draft, because they can get more dragon synergy than the other classes. Next we have Dragon Egg. I think this card is pretty interesting since the spectrums can be so versatile. At the very low end of the spectrum, where maybe the Dragon Egg dies without being actually taking damage, maybe it gets kodoed or whatever, it pretty much becomes a target dummy. Maybe it gets Crazed Alchemist, right? It'll also take it out. It pretty much becomes just a target dummy. It's just a card that doesn't do anything on the board. But it is possible, but it's not going to be very likely. Most likely it's going to be like a Nerubian Egg, where it takes some damage and then it summons something as well. The cool thing about the egg is it being 1 cost instead of 2, so you can play that on turn 1 and then combo it with like abusive or something. I'll talk about those in the synergy, since this card has a lot of synergy. And then Defias Ringleader. This card's pretty. It's like a Defias Ringleader, and if you are able to abusive it, it becomes like a 2 damage. So it becomes the first part of Defias, and then the combo part is the summon the 2/1 whelp. So in the high end, where you buff it and trade up, and then it summons a whelp, it's like a Defias for 1 mana, and that's actually pretty strong. So this card has a lot of potential, I would say, in arena. Now this card has a lot of synergy, especially in Warrior. Warrior, since it has the enraged mechanic, you can the dream would be to play Dragon Egg on turn 1, and then Cruel Taskmaster, turning this into a 2/1, summoning another 2/1, and then trade up into like a 3/2, summoning another 2/1. So you end up taking out their 3/2 and having a 2/1, a 2/1, and a 2/2 on the board, which is ridiculous for as a warrior on turn 2. That's something is unheard of until this card came into existence. And with shamans, they have Rockbiter, they have Flame Tongue Totem to buff it up to make it usable. Rogues, they have Cold Blood, they have Ting Sharp Talon Oil. Paladins have the Blessing of Kings, the Blessing of Might. Hunters have Glazuka. Druids have all the marks. Power of the Wild as well. Warlocks have Power Overwhelming. Mages have Ping. It's not really a card, but it is synergy because you can ping it to turn 2 mana into a 2/1 whelp. So I did add that as a mage synergy, and a lot of mage synergies rely on the ping because the ping is so versatile that it can do a lot of things that no other class has access to. And then Priest has the buffs as well with the Valence Chosen and even the Inner Fire, I believe, to turn into a 2/2. So there's a lot of synergy with this card, and in a randomness of Arena, you can find a lot of use for a card like this. So I'm actually very excited about this card. I think this card's pretty playable, especially in Warrior. I think you should draft it very, very highly in Warrior, and then based on the other classes, you can just see how it works with your deck. The next card we have is Dragon King Sorcerer, comparable to Sen'jin Shieldmaster on the low end. It's just a 3/5 that doesn't do anything, just a basic minion, which I think Sen'jin Shieldmaster is a really good low end card. So even if there's no synergy, it does have a dragon tag, right? And its stats are good for its cost, so it's going to be a good card regardless in Arena, that's for sure. And in the mid end, it's going to depend on if you have a spell like a Violet Teacher. Violet Teacher has spells that get better, so with Dragon King, if Dragon King has a spell that targets itself, it gets better. And then on the high end, where you have a ton of targetable spells, this card is pretty much going to be a Spiteful Smith, a 4/6 body, but for 1 less, which is really strong. So this card is a really good card because its low end is really good, and then it only gets better, and then it also has that dragon tag. So this card, I think, is going to be really common. We're going to see a lot of this in Arena. And then synergies, this card has a lot of synergies as well. There's a lot of targetable spells in a lot of classes. These only 2 classes that actually lack any targetable spells, which is the Hunter and the Mage. You can't really there are no spells that really work well with this. And something to notice is in Priest and Paladin, there are so many targetable spells in those classes that you can almost guarantee find a lot of synergy with a card like this. So this card, I think, is going to be really good, really common in Arena. It's going to change up the meta, giving a lot of 4-drops, a lot of good cards, and a common dragon that is very playable, very versatile. We're going to see a lot of this, I believe, no matter what type of deck you play. Alright, the next card we have is Dragon Crusher. This card is 6/6 for 6. I think it's pretty good stats on the, and then it can even get a lot better if your opponent has 15 or less health, which isn't that hard of a requirement in Arena. You can just start going face early, and on turn 6 you can very easily have him on 15 health. So it's pretty good. And the low end, it's like a legendary, which is pretty cool, right? The Trogzura has a 6/6 for 6 stats, and then based on what your opponent does, it gets better, which is the same as the Crusher. If your opponent is low on health, the Trogzor, the dragon, it gets better, and if your opponent decides to play a spell, the Trogzor gets better, which is pretty cool. In the mid tier, it's more like an ogre. You're going to play it as a 6/6, which you play an ogre as a 6/7, and it's going to trade the same way. The only real card that really wrecks the Crusher would be an ogre, which has that extra health to do extra things with, or to force a hero power or some kind of removal. So even the best 6-drop to compete with the Dragon Crusher, the drawback isn't that high, which makes this card really cool and useful, since it's also got that dragon tag as well, which the ogre does not. And I think it's something that's worth paying that extra 1 health for. And then on the high end, where you actually get it to trigger, it's like a anima golem with no drawback, just a 9/9 for 6 mana, which is really going to mess with some people. But since there are a lot of more interesting cards in the meta now, it may not be as bad as it would seem. Playing a 9/9 for 6 is like playing a Fel Reaver, and with no drawback, just a Fel Reaver. That card has won games in Arena so many times, so just having the ability to have a free 9/9 on turn 6 it seems really strong. And then a card like this doesn't really have synergy. It's just a good card, just a card every deck would love. There are classes that are a little bit more aggressive than others, but every deck can be aggressive if played correctly, especially in Arena, which is very minion based. So with cards like this, where it's not relying on other cards, and it's not relying on it's big cards, good on their own, they're not really going to have synergy. It's just a card you'd pick up when you see it very heavily, and I really think this card's going to be played a lot in Arena. Next card we have is Grim Patreon. This card is very interesting. When I looked at it at first, I was like, man, mages are going to abuse this card. But the more I looked at it, from an Arena standpoint, the less impressed I've been with this card. On the low end, this card is disgustingly bad. It's like playing a faceless manipulator with no target. You just people don't do that because it's that bad. You play a Grim Patreon on turn 5, and then your opponent has a 4-drop like a Yeti or Ascension Shieldmaster, and just one-shots it, and then boom, it's over, it's gone. There was no combo, nothing to make it exciting. So on its low end, it's just not the best. In the mid end, it's going to be like a Gurubashi Berserker. I had a different card in the mid end. I actually had Ravenhold Assassin at first, where I was thinking as a mage you can play it, ping it for 7, and then it'll kind of be like a 6/5, since one of the patrons lose one health to clone another one. But I felt that was kind of silly reasoning, and I felt Enrage is more of how this card works, but Gurubashi Berserker is a pretty slow and bad card in Arena, and that's probably what the Grim Patreon's gonna face. You play the Grim Patreon, and it either gets killed for free, or it gets off an attack and survives, but then your opponent's been doing stuff, or it just gets removed, it gets AoE'd, because 3 health isn't that strong, isn't that survivable. So I don't think this card will be that great. Even in the high end, and you get a trade off, and you have like 2 of them. It's summoning a 6/6 for 5, since you just clone itself, and there are cards like that already in existence. And Ogre Ninja is a good card, but it's not like top tier amazing, oh my god, always pick kind of card. And in Arena, where there's going to be a lot of minions from both sides of the boards, I don't think this card's going to be that scary. It being 5 mana is just a little too slow. If it costs a little bit less that you can combo more with, it would be better. I would say that in most of the classes, there's not enough to justify playing this card. But I would say in Warrior, this has hope. This has a lot of hope because there are a lot of ways to trigger it. There's a lot of combos. Bouncing Blade has been very heavily discussed. The Cruel Taskmaster, again, very useful. Whirlwind even has a use. There's a lot of ways to utilize the ability to survive damage and the ability to deal damage to all your creatures in Warrior that makes this card a card I would very much consider playing, especially in Warrior. As well, maybe Druid you can mark. The issue with the other classes synergies is that it's not immediate, where the buffs aren't immediate. The Paladins can Blessing of Kings and Druids can mark and Priests can buff, but it's not immediate, and it gives your opponent a turn to respond, which in Arena isn't that great because people know how to respond well. The next card we've got is Hungry Dragon, and this card's exciting because it's frankly ridiculous. But a lot of people could tell it was going to be ridiculous when they looked at the card. They look at the stats, they look at the battle cry, and they're like, well, the battle cry isn't, always bad. Even there are ways to abuse that battle cry. So this card is it's going to be the new standard, I feel, in Arena. Yetis have become very common. There's more than one Yeti, meaning that it's not special anymore. It's got a brother now, and everyone loves both of them equally, but no one's like saying, oh my god, he is the one. There are two now, and I think Hungry Dragon's gonna be the new Neo. It's a very powerful card, very good stats. At its low end, right? The way I considered the low to high end is the one, if you summon this card, it summons a 1-cost minion. I looked at, it's very likely for it to have 1 or 2 attack, very very likely. So the low end is if it has 2 attack and it hits the Hungry Dragon, it's going to be like a tall strider. If it has 1 attack, it hits the ambusher, it hits the dragon, it's going to be a 5/5. It's going to be like an ambusher. And if you can find a way to deal with the 1-cost minion it summons, or the 1-cost minion isn't used to affect the dragon, it's going to be like a Pit Lord, which is just ridiculous. Just a free Pit Lord with no drawback and the demon tag. So I think this card's going to be really strong, really good, and there are a lot of ways to use its effect. With MC Tech and with other AoEs, the 4 cost means that you're able to combo this card pretty easily. So this is just looking like a really solid card, a really good card that's going to be seen a lot in Arena. And I was looking at the synergies. Anything with board positioning is what considered synergy with me. And with Priest, I also put Shadow Madness. You can play the Hungry Dragon in Shadow Madness. Maybe something the Hungry Dragon summons. Maybe it gets like a Dust Devil, and then you Shadow Madness the Dust Devil, you hit him in the face and you trade up or something. There are ways to use the 1-cost minion your opponent summons. So I just thought it looks to be a really strong card. I'm excited to see how people in the Arena are going to use this card. Alright, now we have our first legendary that we're talking about, Nefarian. Add 2 random spells in your hand. I think this card is really slow. I was looking at the mid starting from the mid end, right? It's going to be like an Alexstrasza. Alexstrasza's interesting card in the Arena because sometimes it helps and you're like, wow, this card's amazing, and sometimes it does nothing and you're like, wow, this card isn't going to save me at all. And I feel that's what Nefarian is going to have the same issue. It's going to sometimes be like, wow, this card gave me a flame strike and now I can clear the board and actually save me the game. And sometimes it's going to be like a thought steal that doesn't do anything. You get some random weak spells that don't actually affect the board at all, like silence, and you're just like, oh, you know. And so it's an interesting card. Legendaries are very interesting because they're so swingy and they're so unusual compared to other basic minions that it's hard to compare. So I put spells in the low and high ends just to let you know what type of card it can be similar to. Flame Strike, Thought Steals, and it has the stats of Alexstrasza, which in Arena is okay, but you know, there's better legendaries, I would say, even in this expansion. And with most of the legendaries, they're too high costing to have synergies. They're too different. They're too unique to be synergistic. But they are really cool cards, and I'm excited to see some of the new legendaries, the battle cries, and all the extra things that come from it. Next card we're talking about is Volcanic Drake. Cost 1 less for each minion that died this turn. I was trying to find the most similar cost and a type of useless ability in terms of Arena, and the best card I could come up with is Priestess of Elune. If you're top decking and there's no way to trade, you just have to play a 6 cost 6/4, which Elune is a 5/4, but its stats are pretty much very similar. And Elune is almost never played among a lot of Infinite Arena players, or at least when I coach, I rarely ever pick this card because the battle cry does not account for the high cost of the card. But that's very rare to have a low end with Volcanic Drake, especially in the minion heavy nature of Arena. Most likely it's going to be like a Tall Strider or something, or Ogre Brute, where it's going to cost a little bit more, a little bit less. If you can get it to an Ogre Brute, or even Millhouse Mana Storm, 2 mana for health kind of minion, it's going to be very playable, very tempo swinging. So I think this card is interesting, especially since the dragon, if you have those dragon synergies, it might also be useful. So I don't think this is a card to knock out right off the gate. The issue I have with it is the 4 health. Anything with 4 health specifically that costs a lot has a very hard justification because of all the easy 4 damage removals in the game with the True Silver and the Flame Strike and the Flame Cannon and the Argent Commander and the Bomb Lobbers and all those easy ways to deal with 4 health. So I don't really particularly value this card too highly, but there are some synergies in classes that can make hero powers, which is the Shaman and the Paladin. It'll be a lot easier to summon this for cheaper, since you'll get a free minion that you can trade up with and summon the Drake a lot cheaper than you would with other classes. And then with Rogue, I also put in Rogue in there because of Defiance Ring, the ability to combo out an extra minion in the early game to trade up with might be something relevant that the Drake can come out very easily due to that combo. Like off the top of my head, I can think you coin out the Defiance and your opponent plays Murloc Tidehauler, and then you just double trade in, and then the Drake will be 2 cost, and you just play Drake on turn 2 since you coined out the Defiance. Now that might be very swingy. Next card we're talking about is the Rend Blackhand Legendary. If you hold a Dragon, destroy a legendary minion. Well, this card in Arena is not going to be good. It's just it faces too many drawbacks in the arena standpoint. First of all, you have to be holding a dragon, and then first of all, you have to be against a legendary minion, and then second of all, you have to have waited patiently in arena to not play this card on turn 7 or another earlier turn just to have it on the board. And those requirements are so rare that you're never going to see the battle card trigger. It'd be an achievement, I would say, to have this battle card trigger. And on the low end, this card is just really bad because it has that 4 health that dies to everything. Like, you're going up against the mage and you play this card, you spend your whole turn playing this card, and your opponent just flame cannons your legendary and moves on with his day, and you were excited that you got to play your legendary, and your opponent's like, well, my 2 mana card destroyed your 7 mana card, gave me like 2.5 innervates of mana crystals, and now I can proceed to dominate the game a lot easier. It's too risky. This card's too risky from a logical control standpoint to be playing, and I really think this card should be avoided unless the other legendary picks are just really disturbing. In the mid end, this card is a salty dog. It's a more expensive salty dog. And salty dog is already really bad, so it's just not going to be a good card. I really think you should avoid this card completely in arena. And in the high end, this card is, if this card magically triggers, your opponent should surrender just because you had the balls to keep it and to actually wait. But it'll be an assassinate, which summons a really large, powerful minion, and that's actually playable. But that case in arena is going to be really rare. This is much more of a control, constructed card, so I don't think you should be seeing too many of these. And like with legendaries, there's not that much synergy. I should put paladin and priest synergy in there since they have likelihoods for dragons, but I hope you get the point. This card shouldn't be played. No synergies, because you shouldn't play this card at all in arena. And then here we go. We have Emperor Thyriston. This card is pretty interesting. On the low end, it's like a Shield Maiden, and I don't think Shield Maiden is a bad card at all. It's just a 5/5 for 6, which is like a Frost Elemental, just the basic stats. The stats are fine, right? And most of the time, you play this card, it reduces all of the cards in your hand by 1. So if you have 2 or more cards, it's like an innervate. The more cards you have, the more copies of innervate it's like giving you, and it's just going to be a really good legendary because in arena you tend to have a lot of cards, and you play this card and it's going to reduce the cost of all your cards every time, every turn. And this is why on the high end it's broke, because if you can't kill it in a turn, you're wrecked. It's over, because you start playing all of your minions for free and you spam the board, and unless they're a class that can remove all of your minions for free with a cost of 7 mana, it's going to be really tough to come back. So if you see this card and the other cards are not captivating enough for you, I recommend you try this card out at least once, see how it does. And I think it's going to be really strong in arena. Just the ability to have free innervates based on the number of cards in your hand can be really game changing. Like all legendaries, I didn't really put synergies in these because they are so unique, so consistent within themselves that they don't need cards to be good. And then the last card we're talking about today is Mojo Executus, and I butchered that pronunciation. And this card is a very interesting card because there's not really a card of this nature. There is a card of this nature, which is Jirax's, because it does replace your hero just like Jirax's. But the way this card replaces your hero is so unique. It's very interesting. I like how they try to make it 15ish health because Jiraxus is 8 and the Executus has 7, totaling 15. But it's so risky in arena where people just keep bursts in their hand. They'll just kill this card and then they'll target all their bursts in your face, and you really have to know when to use this card for this card to be effective. And it's going to take a lot of play testing to see how good or how bad this card is. This is a card that's very hard to predict because the ability is so unique, so rare. But I would say, just based on gut, this card is not going to be good because Jiraxus, I think, is one of the weakest class legendaries, because you play Jiraxus, you spend your whole turn on Jiraxus, and your opponent ignores your whole board and then just starts going for your face. Then you have to spend the rest of the game trying to stabilize and trying to make up for that, and skip turn basically just to gain a couple health or to gain that 3 damage. So I don't think this card's going to be that impactful, and since it's being a legendary, it's not going to be seen that often. But it's a really cool card, and I think it's something nice that Blizzard's implementing. So that is the part 1 of the card review section. I'm going to be making part 2, part 3 soon. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like, check out the previous video. I did a control guide for Warlock, and then you can also watch an educated video on the right. See you all humans and have a fantastic day.